Yeah, my name is R.K. Mishra. I teach at the Institute of Public Enterprises. I teach public enterprise management. The Institute of Public Enterprise is an institution which has been working in the area of public sector management for the last 65 years. It is working with Government of India, state governments and many national and international organizations. I am the paper coordinator for the course titled Public Sector Management. This course has 5 themes and 18 modules. The themes vary from overview of public sector to the problems that public enterprises have been facing here. We have 11 colleagues who are going to deal with these 18 modules. The module that I am dealing with is titled Overview of Public Sector Management. Now, when we talk of public sector management or public enterprise management, we have always certain questions before us. Question 1 is, what do we mean by public enterprises? Now, when we try to define public enterprises, we come across a number of definitions. These definitions are wide-ranging, and the term has been defined again and again in various countries differently. This has happened because the context of defining public enterprise has also varied from country to country. But when we talk of defining the public sector management, the most easiest way to do that is to break this term into 2 parts, public and enterprise. What do we mean by public? Public means publicly owned, publicly managed, publicly controlled, and publicly accountable. Then what do we mean by enterprise? Enterprise means an initiative that people of a country could take collectively. Why do they take such initiative? They take such initiative to produce goods and render services. And when they do that, this has got to be accounted in the financial statements known as balance sheet and profit and loss account. In doing all that, they must earn a profit, because if they don't earn a profit, that means they have not done any value addition. So this is the broad definition of public enterprises. Now the question comes, what is the expanse of public enterprises in India? This is again, I think, a very interesting thing to say, because India is a country where union and states, they work together. And therefore, we have union public enterprises known as central public enterprises. We have provinces here, 29, and those states, they have enterprises known as state level public enterprises. And then we have municipal corporations, municipalities, and local level institutions. And the enterprises that they own, manage, and run are the enterprises known as municipal enterprises. So, when it comes to expanse of public enterprises, we see public enterprises in India operating at 3 levels: central, state, and local. When it comes to the contribution of public enterprises, we see that public enterprises at the 3 levels have done wonderfully well. They contribute about 12 to 15% of the gross domestic product. They employ about 50% of the personnel in the public sector. And not only that, they also act as a very important instrument of public policy at the hands of the state. Now, we can also be knowing as to why public enterprises have been set up in India. Why not private enterprises? Why not multinationals coming in India and taking up those activities? Public enterprises have to be there in India because when we got our freedom, we neither had multinational corporations coming to our country, nor we had private sector enterprises which were at our back to help the government and people in propitiating the process of economic development. Since that was the case, therefore, both the central government and the state governments, they have to think of taking up the activities by themselves. And in the process of doing that, they have to set up a number of enterprises at the central level and at the state level. Now today, when we talk of expanse of public enterprises at the central level and at the state level, we see that at the central level, we have public enterprises wherein we have an investment of about 20 lakh crores. Now this is at the book value. We are not talking of investment at the current value, because when we talk of investment at current value, it must be very, very large, because we have land acquired by these enterprises or land allocated to these enterprises in early 50s, 60s and 70s, and we all know that the land prices have gone up by 40 to 50 times. So the point that I am trying to make is that in these enterprises, we have immense investment at the central level. Not only that these enterprises are financially very large entities in terms of investment, but going beyond that, we also see that they render services and manufacture goods which also amount to a very, very large size, in the sense that these enterprises, they produce goods and services about 30 lakh crores. Now this is all at the central level, but at the central level also we have to see, do they provide employment? Yes, they are great employment providers. At the central level, they employ about 18 lakh people directly. But then there is an indirect employment provided by these enterprises also. We have in the central government enterprises, we have contract workers. These contract workers are not on the rolls of public enterprises, but they still work for public enterprises. And the number of these contract workers may be about twice the number of those who are in the roles of the central public enterprises. So this is all about the central public enterprises. Let us talk something about the state level public enterprises. We have 29 states, and I understand that we have about 1,045 state level public enterprises. There are states which have very large number of enterprises. We have states with a small number of enterprises, and it's very interesting to note that even when we have been talking about privatization, liberalization, restructuring, there have been cases when we have been setting up new enterprises, not only at the state level, but also at the central level. So the point that I am trying to make is that, like the central government, state governments also have, a large number of public enterprises. They are, in fact, 4 times the number of the central public enterprises, and the amount of investment in these enterprises is roughly about 50% of the investment of the central public enterprises, which is in the vicinity of about 10 lakh crores. And they again provide employment to roughly about 1 million people. This is the number which is half of the number of the employment provided by the state public enterprises. We also have at the local level large number of public enterprises. At the local level we have municipalities and municipal corporations which have been running buses. We have municipal corporations which have been managing dairies. We have municipal corporations which have set up small enterprises. Now going beyond that, when we talk of expanse of public enterprises, there are some very fascinating things to note. We have defense factories now. These defense factories, they come under the Ministry of Defense, and there is a defense board, and defense board owns up these defense factories. There are 39 such defense factories in India. We also have what are known as public financial institutions. And when we talk of public financial institutions, we have 2 sorts of entities which come over there. One, we have the entities which are known as commercial banks of the government. And I understand that these banks are again in a very, very large number. They contribute a lot to the deposit mobilization and the savings which we have in our country. Then we have what are known as development banking institutions. We call them DFIs. And in DFIs, again, we have large number of DFIs in our country. We can't stop here. There are some other categories of the public enterprises. For instance, we have deemed public enterprise. Now, deemed public enterprises are such which come under section 56B of the CAG report, and under this 56B there are enterprises where in investment of the government is 50% and the investment of the private sector is 50%. So together it makes up 100%, but the management is not in the hands of the government, management is in the hands of the private people. So they are known as deemed public enterprises. We have to go beyond this, and then we find another category of public enterprises. We have port trusts in our country. We have 11 major port trusts, and we have about 39 to 40 minor port trusts. They are also expanding, I think, in a very, very big way, because transportation has to improve in our country, and this is the cheapest form of transportation. And the investment again in this port trust is about 17,000 to 20,000 crore. So what we then come to understand is the fact that public enterprises have a very, very large expanse. There is no activity which is beyond the pale of public enterprises in our country. We don't find any level of public administration where we don't have public enterprises. These enterprises, they are also an instrument of policy in the hands of the government. For instance, we can go back to economic recession, which took place between 2005 to 2008-9. And they were the days when public enterprises, they came forward, they provided stability to the country by selling goods and services, by keeping people on their roads, by generating new demand, and by pushing the economy forward, unlike what private sector enterprises have been doing. When the whole world was yielding under recession between 2005 and 2008, and the GDP of those countries was coming down drastically, it was India where GDP of the country didn't decline that much, and we retained the employment at the same level. So what one can say is that public enterprises in our country have been expanding not only because of ideology but also because of pragmatism. It is said that public enterprise in India are there not because of a doctrinary approach but also because of a pragmatic approach. Now, let us also try to understand why public enterprises have been there. We have discussed some of these reasons before, but then there are other valid reasons. For instance, one is we have constitutional provisions, and these constitutional provisions, they require the presence of public enterprise. Let us refer to Article 39 of the Indian Constitution. Now, when we refer to Article 39 of the Indian Constitution, that enjoins on the state to provide certain services, to take care of the citizens. And in the vain to do that, there is no other goal for the state but to have public enterprises as their limbs. And public enterprises then they act as the limbs of the government. And without those limbs, we can very well understand that the government cannot function. Not only that, we were born as a socialistic economy. And in a socialistic economy, we also have the problem of equity, the problem of removing inequality, the problem of overcoming regional inequalities. Now, given that if we have inequalities and between one and the other region, then this regional development or the balanced development of the country can only happen when public enterprises are created to balance the unequal development between the so-called developed states and the underdeveloped states. We will see that the areas, the states like, Telangana, the states like, Bihar, UP, Madhya Pradesh, where there was no development and the industry was not coming forward, the private sector was not coming forward. It was the public sector which came forward. It was the public enterprises which were set up to industrialize those states. So we have the problem of regional underdevelopment, and that problem belongs not only to India. We have a number of countries which have been facing that problems, and they have been taking recourse to the same measure that the government of India at the central level and the state governments have been taking, at the state level. Then there's the question of leading the economy. There are a number of areas where we need research, number of areas which we need to foster. Now, private sector enterprises will not be coming up there because, one, they can't be taking risk because those areas are very, very new to them. Number two, they would not like to put that much of money which is required in putting to see that those ideas they get translated into reality. And also, I think working in those areas is very, very complex and difficult. And we have been seeing that in India, when it comes to development of technology, like let us say space sciences. Now we have space sciences, and these space sciences are the cutting area of research all over the world. Now, in such areas, private sector doesn't come forward, and it is the public sector which has come forward. Also, let us talk about developing entrepreneurship in the country. Now, to develop entrepreneurship in the country, you have to provide venture capital, you have to provide startup capital to youngsters for the startups. Now, that kind of money would not be coming from the private sector as much as the money needed to develop entrepreneurship and also startups. And we see that over the last 50 years, banks, they have done an admirable job by coming forward and providing venture capital funds to those who have very brilliant business ideas, but they don't have adequate capital to support those ideas. And also we see startups right now. Startups are there in a big way. In fact, startups will shape the future of India and future of many other countries. Now, to support those startups financially, again, we see that DFIs or commercial banks in the public sector, they come forward and they provide, finances. Also, I think at times we can say that public enterprise, they provide employment. There are some critics who say that public enterprises have become employment factories, but I would disagree to that. Public enterprises have provided employment to people and created skills in those areas where these skills were not available. So this skill development also has been done in a big way by public enterprises, and they are even now engaged in that task. Now, not only that, there is a question of regulation, I think. When we set up private sector, can we allow private sector to function the way they like? Can they function in a way which doesn't cater to the interest of the country? Can we allow them to function in a very in a way that, which is not regulated? And we see that to tackle this problem, the government of India has created a number of regulatory organizations. For instance, let us take the area of finance. Now, in finance at the top, we have Reserve Bank of India. Further going down, when we talk of security markets, we have SEBI, Securities and Exchange Board of India. When we talk of telecom, which is a new field, but there we have to regulate the private sector from India and private sector from abroad, and joint ventures between the Indian enterprises and also the foreign enterprises. Again, we require a regulatory body, and again that regulatory body has been set up in the public sector. We call it Telecom Authority of India. So you see, I think there are different areas, And in each areas where private sector is functioning, you require a thorough and very sound regulation. And this regulation can come only, or has been coming from the public sector. So coming to the expanse and also the reasons why public sector should be there, I think we have talked a bit. Let me also add that central government in our country, they took the initiative of setting up enterprises initially. But you will agree that central government can't reach far and wide in each and every village, in each and every part of India. And therefore government of India or the central government has to work in unison with the state governments. And following from what the central government did, the state governments also set up enterprises. For instance, state government, they set up enterprises to convert local resources into industrial products. They set up sugar mills. They set up mills, to provide, foodstuffs. Now, they have to set up enterprises to provide transport facilities. In each state, we have road transport corporations. These are very large, enterprises. If you talk of road transport corporations, you find that roughly 2 million people have been employed by road transport corporations in all India. Let us, take another very good example. That good example can be of power now. You and I can't do anything without power. And who produces this power? When you talk of power sector in India, you see that government of India generates only 20-25% power through NTPC and many other enterprises, but the rest, roughly about 58% or 55%, is produced by the state governments, by their power stations. These power stations may be coal-based power stations, or they may be hydro power stations. Some states have also been producing power based on the nuclear technology. But you see that power is mostly produced. Though we have been trying to privatize power in our country, but we have seen that during the last 20 years, despite all the efforts that we have made, despite all the encouragement we have given, despite all the incentives we have given, our private sector has not been coming forward, and private sector has been able to produce something like 7 to 8%. Now in a country like India, we require, there is a huge demand for power sector. And I think this will be going very, very fast. If you compare India with China, we find that in India, we are still producing 1/4 of the power that China is producing. In China, we produce 600,000 MW. Whereas in India, we produce 150,000 MW. In China, we produce 600,000 MW. So 4 times more they have been producing. The question is that if public enterprise would not have been there, then we will not have produced even this 150,000 MW. So regulatory bodies are also there in the public sector. This is all about the expanse of the public sector and also the reasons why public sector should be there. Now the question comes, how do these enterprises function? Now we have different forms of organization, and I understand that this will be taught to you, or my other colleague will be talking about you. But then, when you look into the government, the way, between 1948 and 2016, you find that between 1948 to 1965, most of the enterprises that were set up in the public corporation form. They are set up in the public corporation form because that was the government policy, and government of India wanted public enterprises to have an entity other than that of its own. Government of India believed in autonomy and accountability. But what happened was that 1965 onwards, we wanted to set up more and more enterprises. We wanted to set up enterprises with very fast. We wanted enterprises to take off very, very fast. Then we found that public corporation form was not finding favor with the government, and the government of India then started setting up public enterprises in the form of companies. We had the Companies Act 1956, now we have the Companies Act of 2013, a new act, but most of the enterprises in our country, they are set up under Companies Act 1956, and in the Companies Act 1956, we had an article, a section 619. Under the section 619, any enterprise which has 51% contribution of the share capital coming from the Government of India or the state governments, or together by Government of India and the state governments, that it was then said that such enterprise would be a public enterprise. By taking recourse, by setting up public enterprise in the company form, it became very easy for the government to set up public enterprises, because President of India had to sign the MOA and the chief of the enterprise has to sign MOA, and with the signatures of these two people, the company could have been easily registered. And this is, I think, one reason why most of the public enterprises have been set up as the public, as the in the company form. Let us note one thing here, that all the central public enterprises in our country, all the central public enterprises in India, which are now 270, now all these 270 enterprises, they have been set up in the company form. What could be the reason? One reason we have already seen. One reason is that the speed of setting up a company can be very, very rapid when it is in the company form. But there are other things also. The other thing is that when you set up a public sector enterprise in the company form, you also ensure that enterprise works under the same framework under which private enterprises have been working. And so therefore we can always talk of the level playing field. So public and private enterprises, you provide them, the same, ground to operate, and public enterprises just don't get additional advantages because they are sons and daughters of the state. So this was one thing. The other thing is that you have not to come again and again to the parliament, or you have not to come again and again to the state legislative assemblies. Whenever we have to change any provision, we can change those provisions by modifying the rules in the articles of association. We can change the MOA of the company, which is very difficult to do in the case of public corporation, because when you do in the case of public corporation, you have to again move an amendment in the parliament. And I think the parliaments have been very, very busy. Parliament doesn't find, I think, that much time that it should be finding, I think, for changing, amending the MOA and the articles of association. But whereas, we have executive freedom in the case of government companies, you don't have that kind of executive freedom in the case of public corporations. But when it comes to autonomy, I think it's very clear that public corporation, emerges as the winner, in the sense that public corporations doesn't come through an act under which number of enterprises can be set up. Public corporations, they come up through a specific act, and they have the responsibility of the public corporation for the government, and the responsibility of the government towards public corporation, they are well defined, and they have to operate, in that framework. But then there are problems also. If there is a rift between government and the enterprise, then we find that it becomes very difficult to solve the rift very, very fast. You can take the case of TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority of America, where government was not going, was not on the same page with the TVA, and the government wanted to fire the TVA president. But the president of the United States of America could not fire the president of the Tennessee Valley Authority, because in the act there was no such provision, and therefore the TVA chairman continued for full 6 years. Friends, now we will talk about the policy framework within which public enterprises operate. So when we talk about the policy framework, we have to keep three things in mind. One, industrial policy statements. Two, different 5-year plans. And three, national common minimum program. All of us know that we have had a couple of industrial policy statements. The first industrial policy statement was made in Parliament in 1948, which was followed by another policy statement known as Industrial Policy Resolution in 1956. And then afterwards, we have been making industrial policy statements. Now, in the 1948 Industrial Policy Resolution, we divided the industries into 4 parts. And in the first part, we had included those sectors which had to be given over only to public enterprises. And those industries were known as core industries or strategic industries. Many of them belong to the defense sector. Now, in the second category, we had industries where Government of India had to progressively own those industries in the times to come and had to take over them from the private enterprises. In the third part, or in the third category, we had industries where public and private sector could operate simultaneously. And in the fourth category, we had industries which were the preserve only of private enterprises. So, what we see is the fact that our industrial development began with a very dominant presence of the public enterprises. The second industrial policy resolution was made in 1956 in our parliament. By that period, we had some development achieved. Our rate of growth was around 3.5%. We had been seeing a spur of activities in the private sector, and therefore it was decided that we had to give a little more space, room to private sector in our country. And therefore, the 4 categories that were carved out in 1948 were then made 3. In the first category, it was only the public sector which had to operate. In the second category, public and private sector enterprises, they could operate simultaneously. And in the third category, we had the demarcation only for the private sector enterprises. But in between 1951 to now, we have 12 plans. We had the 5-year planning starting in our country, and in these plans, right from the first plan to, I would say, to 7th or 8th plan, we had a great emphasis on public sector enterprises being set up in our country. This was the period when the contribution of public sector to GDP was also increasing. But after 10th plan, the contribution of public sector to GDP started declining, mostly because private enterprises were coming forward, and the contribution of private enterprises, started increasing. In between, in 1991, we had a coalition government. We had a very bad economic situation between 1988 to 1991, and our country was facing the payments problem, and therefore in 1991 we started what is known as new economic era for the government. Mr. Narasimha Rao was the Prime Minister of India between 1991 and 1996. We had the then finance minister, who also was a very well-known economist, and together during that period we started, what is known as economic reforms. We started reforming India economically, and as a part of new economic policy, we came out with what is known as National Common Minimum Program. That this National Common Minimum Program was the program agreed upon by the ruling party and by the other parties, not ruling party, by the parties who formed a coalition and running the government together. In that NCMP, or National Common Minimum Program, it was decided that public enterprises which were profitable, those enterprises had to compete. Public enterprises which were not profitable would have to become profitable. Public enterprises which were comically loss-making would then be, would have to be, or which were known as sick enterprises, which had to be turned around, and public enterprises which would not come in any of these categories would be handed over to the private sector. It was also decided that the money which would come from the disinvestment in public enterprises would be plowed back in the public sector to enable them to come up with new technology, to enable them to develop new technology, and also allowing public sector enterprises to use part of that money in the social restructuring of the public enterprises. Now, this was the policy, and we see that more or less that policy has been continuing. The major emphasis of the policy was that a public enterprise can continue to be a public enterprise, but there is no need for the government to keep all the shareholdings with itself. And following that, we have seen that in our country from 1991 and 2016, we have been undertaking disinvestment in public enterprises. Even for the year 2016-17, in the current budget, we have provided 40,000 crore revenue coming from the disinvestment in the central public enterprises. The state enterprises also started following the initiative of the central government. So this is how public enterprise they have grown in India. The question then comes up: what is that? Public enterprises have been facing as problems. When you talk of public enterprises, facing problems, I think we can certainly come out with a couple of things. One is the question is autonomy. Can we give public enterprises more autonomy? Now this question has been resolved by the government by creating a scheme of Maharatna, Navaratna, Mini Ratna 1 and Mini Ratna 2. And we have seen that as a part of the recommendation of the Arjun and Gupta committee in 1996, progressively we are giving more and more powers, economic powers, to public enterprises, and based on those powers now they can buy assets abroad, they can buy technology abroad, they can set up units abroad, they can set up joint ventures, I think, there. So a lot of freedom is being given to them. Now, many other things have been done. For instance, from 1991 onwards, a new instrument was introduced in bolstering the relationship between public enterprises and the government. That is known as MOU, Memorandum of Understanding. Under this, Government of India and the respective enterprises have to agree to the objectives of the enterprise, to the mission of the enterprise, to the programs of the enterprise, to financial goals of the enterprise, to social goals of the enterprise, to production goals of the enterprise, and those enterprises are being graded as A, B, C, D, E, or those enterprises are graded as outstanding, or those enterprises are graded as excellent, very good, good, fair, etc. So those enterprises which do very, very well they get good performance pay. Those enterprises which do well, their CMDs, they get extension. Those enterprises which do well, they are assisted in one way or the other by the public by the government. There have been many other things, which have been done by the government for the public sector enterprises. The government of India has allowed them now to raise capital abroad, especially those enterprises which are Maharatnas and which are Navaratnas. But besides that, also there are problems. You have the problem of productivity in public enterprises. You find too much capital and too little output. We have been finding the problem of technology. Many of these enterprises, they have outmoded technology. They don't have the most current technology, as at their end. The third thing is market share. These enterprises have not been able to improve or are not able to improve, the market share. And also, I think we find that their competitiveness, I think, vis-a-vis their counterparts in the private sector and their counterparts abroad, that requires, I think, a significant, significant improvement. Now the question is, where these enterprises can improve. If you look into the investments in these enterprises, we find that there are in all 22 cognate sectors. 15 sectors are in the field of manufacturing and 7 are in the field of services. When we talk of manufacturing, we find a lot of money has gone into steel, lot of money has gone into coal-based enterprises, lot of money has gone into electricals, lot of money has gone in heavy engineering enterprises. Now these are the enterprises which are bulk of the investment. They have, huge assets. Can we do something by which they can unlock the value in these assets? That's, I think, a very, very major question. How that can be done? That has been engaging the mind of the government. That has been engaging the mind of what is known as Niti Aayog. That has been engaging the minds of consultants. Has also been engaging the mind of the managements, I think, in these enterprises, of the scholars. What can be done so that they can improve productivity? Now, the other thing is that can we improve their profitability? That's a very, very major issue. Now, we say that public enterprises are doing very well and they have been earning huge money. They have been making big contribution to government by way of taxes, by way of excise duties, by way of interest payments. But given all that, one can say that still they have to go too far. Too far in the sense that if we talk of economic value added, we find that economic value addition by these enterprises is if not very small, is not very satisfactory too. Because in economic value added, you take the cost of capital and you take profitability, and you find many enterprises are not adding any value, and some enterprises are even destroying, I think, their value. So what can be done so that they can improve? Also, I think when we talk of total factor productivity, we find that TFP in these enterprises is not going up. TFP is either static or TFP is or declining. So these are, I think, the problems with many of these enterprises have been facing, and we have to, these enterprises have to do something. Government has to do something to pep up, the performance of these enterprises. There are some very grave, areas of grave concern. We can talk of steel industry. Now, public sector steel industry was doing very well 10 years back. Last 5 years, they have been facing problems. Problems are coming from exports by Russia and many other countries. Prices are going down. And you see, I think problems have been aggravated because China now doesn't demand that much of steel which it has been demanding earlier. And with that, we have also been seeing that British steel industry, owned up by Tata, is now in doldrums. And we have been seeing the impact of all this on the public sector steel industry. And we have been seeing that the profitability is going down, the production is going down there, the per capita output is going down there, on the competitiveness index, it is not doing better. We can also take the case of a very big enterprise like ONGC now. ONGC is a very big enterprise, but you see that oil prices are going down, and with the oil prices going down, all oil sector enterprises have suffered, I think, a lot. Only those enterprises which have upstream and downstream both, the arms in their hand, they have been surviving, but the enterprises which are only on the downstream, but not on the upstream, they are in big problems. So NGC has both upstream and downstream, so it's okay. But when it comes to the case of Indian Oil Corporation and many other enterprises, they are, I think, in the deep problems. So I think let me sum up. And when I sum up, I would say a couple of things. One, public sector or public enterprise is the backbone of this country. As a man can't stand up, you and I can't walk erect without backbone. I would say very emphatically that a country like ours can't stand up and can't then compete in the global scenario if public enterprises are not there. One. Number two, public enterprises have to be there for two reasons. One is they existed because we didn't have private enterprises coming up and taking up those working in those areas. Multinationals were just not seen, so they had to be there. But that was the context yesterday. But the context today and tomorrow would be new innovations, new technology, research. Now these are the areas where gestation period is very, very long, where fusion period is very, very long. When profitability, goes up year after year, you don't have defined profitability. You will lead these enterprises and you will need money for them. And money for them will have to come in, big way. The third thing which goes in favor of these enterprises is that India needs massive investment in infrastructure. When we talk of infrastructure, we are talking of transportation, we are talking of banking, we talk of commerce, we talk of education, we talk of health. We require huge money, and it's only the government which can bring in that money, and government can implement its programs through the policy instrument of public enterprises. That's how things are happening anywhere in the world. Now, I give one very tropical and interesting example. We have been talking of bullet trains in India. We propose a bullet train between Ahmedabad and Mumbai. Government of Japan is going to give funding for that project. I understand that the government of Japan is giving about 1 lakh crore for the project. This 1 lakh crore will have to be repaid over a period of 50 years. And within that, there will be a moratorium of 15 years. The rate of interest is 0.1% per annum. This shows that India, which is a big country, also requires very huge and big projects, and these huge and big projects, they can be implemented only at the government level, and the government will have to do these things not through the instrumentality of its bureaucracy, but government will have to then set up public enterprises, or government will get it done through the instrumentality of public enterprises. And that's what Government of India has conceived in the case of the Ahmedabad-Mumbai bullet train project. Thank you.